The failure to meet a child's basic needs is considered abuse. Host Cynthia Jimenez sat down with a psychotherapist and a doctor to go over the important warning signs. Watch.
Maybe you're in a relationship and you notice that maybe one parent or caregiver maybe could use a little bit of help. We're going to talk about how you can find that help in just a moment. But first, let's go over emotional abuse, what it is, how it's caused. Either one. Jump on in.
So let's go. Emotional abuse is the use of the mouth as the instrument of
hurt.
Hurt. Yeah, I was going to say punishment, but hurt. That's a good word. And which it's the words, and like I say, it goes against the soul, against the ego. So it really hits deep.
So one of the things that I would add would be things that people say. So words that you're hurting your child would be things like calling them names, telling them that what they're doing isn't good enough. When you tell your child, "What, are you stupid?" or "How could you not know not to do that?" And so it's those direct statements that you're making you think you're helping your child by showing them that what they're doing is not the best way, but you're using words that hurt, and your child then internalizes that and it becomes part of their identity. So I am somebody who's stupid, I am somebody who can't do things. And so that then starts causing that hurt in their soul, as Dr. Lambert was saying, that then translates into other areas.
What about also profanity? I mean, it's not just distasteful and tacky, but what if you're using profanity towards your children on a regular basis?
Well, I think that's the same thing. It's using words that carry, that's a demeaning. To say that to your child is very demeaning. And I think the impact of this is on the child's self-worth. And in a society like ours where we have to work to get ahead, if you don't feel you're worthwhile, or it doesn't matter what I do, I'm just a effing whatever, or what words that people can use, that has long-term effect on children. And I think now we're beginning to understand that a lot of these chemicals that are in our brain, when we can have things, when we're stressed, they either go up or they go down, and that affects our long-term health. They don't just go back to steady state again, especially if that word triggers. My dad used to say that to me all the time, or something like that. It can put you years and years later in a depression or in a hyper state of that. Domestic violence is a good example of this, where the adults are fighting with each other and people think, oh, it doesn't affect kids. But we now know that just watching domestic violence actually has big effect on children. That for one, this is what becomes what is normal, right? And in all relationships people argue, but there's a difference between arguing and hitting. And that it's the emotional component of domestic violence that impacts children.
Well, and there's also the brain development changes. So whenever you're looking at violence, or you hear about the violence, or you're listening, whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse, or just watching violence, we know that there's a lot of research now that says that it actually changes the way the brain develops. And then that affects the way that you can have positive relationships as an adult, because your brain is the actual physiological components change. And so you see things differently because your brain is different. And so that is where one of the big areas, and in this, understand that this also impacts not just your interaction emotionally with other people, but it impacts your ability to learn new information. So it's going to impact a child's academics as well. It's going to impact how far they can go in life, the kind of jobs that they can get later. I think sometimes we forget that this is not just on an emotional way, oh, it's just a social thing. No, it's on a physiological thing, and it impacts our society in the long term, because if your child is not able to get good grades and they're not able to get a good job, they're not doing as well in our society, so they're not contributing or giving back to our society. And so that's the way, on a global way, that it's affecting all of us. So yes, it affects the house and that one child in that little unit, but then it's also affecting us on a global term as well.
And let's touch quickly on neglect, and then let's talk about some help people can get here. So neglect, briefly.
So neglect is really about what we talk about, the things around them: food, the quality of housing, the quality of education. It's making sure the child gets the basic needs that every child needs. That is good nutrition. Look, even people who don't like government intervention agree that the breakfast program at school has been very successful because children who have eaten well in the morning learn better, right? And so it's about good food, it's about safe housing, because if you live in a violent neighborhood, it's hard when you get to school to decompress yourself to pay attention if you're worried about all the shooting that occurred last night. And it's also about the quality of schools, which obviously we debate about constantly in the United States and in Florida.
Well, it has a lot to do with it. Let's talk about what people can do to get help. And there's PPP, there's PCIT, there's a lot of acronyms and things.
If we can go first, I think
Yes.
a really important thing is, remember in Florida, if you see something that you suspect, you don't have to know, that you suspect that a child is being maltreated, maltreatment being abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, please call it in, 1-800-96-ABUSE. That's the number. I suggest calling, not using the internet. Call.
Why?
Make a report, because that allows somebody to go out and investigate. And remember, the purpose of DCF is not to remove children from their parents, it's to provide help to parents. That's one of the ways to get it. The other ways are to call things like in Miami-Dade we have 211, so a clearinghouse, the switchboard of Miami. These are clearinghouses that you can say, I have this particular problem. What they can't solve is housing. I will just say that that's one of the, we don't really have
What
that.
happens when you call that abuse hotline? Somebody comes and knocks on the door? What happens?
Depending on if the abuse hotline accepts the report, they either say 3 hours or an immediate or 24 hours. They will have to make contact with the alleged victim child and then decide if the family needs help.
By the way, if you want to watch more of this episode, download the Health Channel app and search mental health. We hope it helps.